I was a Mossad agent, assigned to a covert operation deep in the Sudanese desert. Coordinates: 23°53'49 N, 30°39'59 E. Mission parameters were clear: locate and retrieve a data cache hidden beneath the barren sands. It seemed straightforward, yet something about the heat, the silence, felt wrong. The air was thick with the scent of earth, and a hum resonated from the very ground itself. No one knew what we were really dealing with. Our objective was classified, reasons I would come to understand only in the most horrifying way. Every detail was compartmentalized, leaving me with an uneasy sense that I was being kept in the dark. The satellite images we were given showed a structure half buried in the desert floor. In the sterile briefing room, the drone footage was grainy, as if the very air around the facility distorted the lens. The coordinates led us to an area devoid of life: no wildlife, no plants, no movement. It was as if the land itself had swallowed everything. The further we moved in, the more a strange, subtle pressure settled on my chest. My team was chosen for their skills, each one handpicked for specific talents, but the subtle dread in the air lingered over us all. At the time, we chalked it up to the harsh environment and the mounting stress of the operation. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the occasional crackle of our radios. But I sensed there was something else, something ancient, waiting beneath the desert's skin. There was no way to know that soon we would come face to face with forces that were never meant to be awakened. The Cold War had left its scars, and the stakes of this operation were far more than just strategic. The intelligence community had been tracking reports of strange phenomena in the region for years, whispers of hidden technology and unnatural occurrences buried deep beneath the earth. Theories ranged from ancient military installations to something far more ominous. Our mission was simple: recover the data, gather intelligence, and return. But we all knew there was something deeper at play, something that could tip the global balance in ways we could not yet comprehend. The Sudanese desert had long been an enigma, a place of ancient ruins and lost civilizations. Official records were scarce, but rumors about the area had been circulating since the early 1950s. Some spoke of nuclear testing, others of occult practices. But as we prepared to deploy, I couldn't shake the thought that we were not alone in this operation. Not in the literal sense, but in a more insidious way. The land, the air, the atmosphere, it was as if we were being watched, tracked. Our commander, Colonel Aharon Golan, a veteran of countless operations, did not speak much of his concerns. He focused on the mission, the logistics, and ensuring we had all the gear needed. But I saw the tightness in his jaw, the subtle glance he exchanged with our communications specialist. He too could feel the weight of something wrong in the air. The surveillance satellites we relied on seemed to distort as we moved closer to our target, as if the very fabric of reality was warping. It was as if the desert had a pulse, one that beat louder the closer we got. At the time, our focus remained on the task: secure the data, extract it, and return. But I had begun to wonder if we were playing a role in a much larger scheme, one that had been set into motion long before we arrived. And in those early moments, as our chopper sliced through the dry air, I realized there would be no going back, not after what we would uncover. Our team was a tight-knit unit, each member chosen for specific skills that would prove essential in the coming mission. First, there was Colonel Aharon Golan, our commander. A seasoned veteran with a stone-cold demeanor, he had led countless covert operations across the globe. His cold logic and military precision kept us grounded in the worst of circumstances. Yet even he had his moments of hesitation, rare but telling, as though some instinct was trying to break through the years of training. Then there was Captain Daniela Ben-Ami, our medic. She was calm under pressure, her eyes always sharp, always assessing. A woman of few words, but when she spoke, it was with a knowledge that ran deep. Medical knowledge, yes, but also something more. She often spoke about the human body as a machine, but something in her voice would change when she spoke of the soul. As if she could see things others couldn't, perhaps even understand things that were beyond conventional science. Sergeant Eli Guidi, our demolitions expert, was the last person you would want to handle explosives in any normal scenario. He had a chaotic, reckless energy to him, a man who found joy in the intricacies of bombs and controlled destruction. But what set him apart from others in his field was his precision. When things fell apart, when we needed someone who could think on their feet, Eli was the one we turned to. Despite his bravado, there was a subtle wariness in his eyes. Maybe he knew, in some deep corner of his mind, that this mission would not be like any other. Then there was Sergeant Major Tzvi Mir, our communications specialist. He was a sharp analyst, his mind always working, always a step ahead. He had been trained to interpret signals from the most obscure sources, and if anyone could track down the facility's encrypted data, it was him. But I noticed something strange in the days leading up to our deployment. Tzvi had begun to talk about static that didn't exist, signals from deep within the desert that seemed to speak to him. He dismissed it as a technical glitch, but I could see the unease creeping into his eyes. Lastly, there was me, Agent Yaron Davidoff. My role was that of a tactical specialist, the one who ensured our movements were efficient, our actions precise. I had spent years learning the art of survival in hostile territories, but nothing in my training had prepared me for the suffocating silence of the desert. There was a feeling here, a wrongness I could not articulate, but it had taken hold of me from the moment we touched down. Each of us had our own unique skills, but it was clear that what we were about to face would require more than training. It would demand something else, something primal and unknowable. And as the helicopter blades began to slow, and the distant shadow of the facility came into view, I felt the creeping sensation that we were being drawn into something far beyond our comprehension. The briefing was clinical, sterile, on the surface. But as Colonel Golan outlined the mission parameters, I could sense an undercurrent of tension among us. The task was simple: locate the facility, retrieve the data cache, and extract. But the more Golan spoke, the more I realized that no one, not even him, knew exactly what we were dealing with. The satellite footage of the target area was riddled with anomalies, static-filled images, strange shadows that didn't conform to any known pattern. The data we were given seemed intentionally vague, with heavy portions redacted, as if someone had gone to great lengths to keep certain details from us. We were briefed on the technical specs of the facility, an underground complex designed to withstand the harshest environments, with high-tech systems for data storage and encryption. The facility was buried deep beneath the desert, unreachable by surface vehicles. Our insertion point would be several miles away, and we were instructed to approach on foot. The tactical plan was to locate the main entrance, breach it, secure the facility's data core, and then exfiltrate within 24 hours. Nothing about this mission seemed out of the ordinary, at least not on paper. As we prepared for deployment, the heat of the desert sun beat down on us, making everything feel heavy, oppressive. Our gear was checked and double-checked: rifles, satellite phones, oxygen tanks, and mapping devices. But as I adjusted my pack, a sinking feeling settled in my chest. It wasn't just the weight of the equipment. It was something about the place, something that gnawed at me. I had been on missions where the stakes were high, but this felt different. Something was hidden here, something far older and more dangerous than we could comprehend. We boarded the choppers in silence, the hum of the blades deafening in the heavy air. As we took off, I watched the vast expanse of desert stretch out beneath us, endless and empty. It felt like the earth itself had been waiting for us. Our destination was still miles away, but as we flew, I felt the air grow colder, the landscape shifting in subtle ways. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the wind, the heat, but the horizon seemed to warp in ways I could not explain. The closer we got, the more I felt that we were being drawn into something that was not meant for human eyes. As we touched down, the world outside the helicopter grew eerily quiet. The wind had died down, leaving behind a suffocating stillness. The desert was nothing like what I had seen before. Its emptiness felt thick, almost alive. We quickly unloaded the gear and began our approach. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone, not just in the physical sense, but in a way that had nothing to do with human presence. There was something ancient beneath the sand, and it was waiting for us. We began our trek into the desert under the harsh, unforgiving sun, each step sinking slightly into the dry, powdery sand. The heat was oppressive, But it was not the physical discomfort that unsettled me. It was the silence. The deeper we went, the more it felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting. Even the air seemed thick, each inhalation tasting faintly metallic, as though something was pressing down from above, filling the space between us with a tension that had no origin. The terrain was desolate, barren of life, but there was an eerie quality to the emptiness. No animals, no insects, nothing but the endless stretch of sand and the occasional rock formation. The usual sounds of a desert, the whisper of wind, the shifting of sand, were absent. All we could hear were our boots crunching against the arid ground and the occasional clink of equipment. Even the radios were unnervingly quiet, save for a few intermittent bursts of static. As we neared our target, the topography began to change. The desert floor was rippling as if the sand itself was alive, shifting beneath our feet in a slow, undulating rhythm. My heart skipped a beat as I looked around, trying to understand what I was seeing. There was no wind, no reason for the sand to move in this unnatural way. It was as though the ground itself was subtly reacting to our presence. I exchanged a quick glance with TV, our communications specialist, who was staring at his device, the screen flickering. His face was pale, and I could see his fingers trembling as he adjusted the settings. "We are close," Golan said quietly, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. There was no need for further discussion. We all knew the facility was nearby. The map, the coordinates, the briefings, everything pointed to this location. But as we approached the supposed entrance, a sudden chill cut through the heat, an unnatural cold that seemed to seep into our bones. The shadows stretched unnaturally long, and the landscape around us began to warp, the horizon bending in ways that made no sense. It was as if the world was folding in on itself. Tuzvi's voice crackled over the comms, distorted and strained. "Something's wrong. The signals..." His words faltered, and for the first time, his usual analytical tone was replaced with fear. I could hear the hum of something faint but constant in the background, a low-frequency sound that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. It was a sound that should not have existed, a vibration in the air that pressed against our bodies and filled our ears. As we reached the site, a shadow loomed on the horizon. The structure was barely visible at first, blending seamlessly with the surrounding terrain. It looked less like a building and more like an organic part of the desert itself, its edges blurred, like the sand had gradually consumed it. As we approached the entrance, a sudden wave of nausea washed over me. The air grew thick, like the pressure of a storm was building. My thoughts began to fragment, and for a brief moment, I couldn't remember why I was here. The only thing I could feel was the weight of something ancient pressing in from all sides. We stopped at the threshold of the facility, our footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. It was time to enter, but none of us moved immediately. Something inside me hesitated, as if the facility itself was warning us to turn back. The building before us seemed to pulse, its surface shifting in ways that defied logic. A low hum filled the air, as if the structure was alive, breathing. And with that, we crossed the threshold, knowing full well that nothing would be the same after this. The door to the facility opened with a sound that made my teeth ache, a grinding noise like metal scraping against stone. It was as if the building had been waiting centuries for us to step inside. A dull, flickering light illuminated the darkened hallway, casting long, trembling shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The air inside was stifling, thick with an odor I could not place. Chemical, metallic, and something faintly organic. The very atmosphere felt heavy, pressing in on us as if the walls themselves were closing in. As we moved deeper into the facility, the quiet was suffocating. The building had no signs of life, no maintenance workers or guards, nothing to suggest it had been active in recent times. But there was something off about it. The walls, though lined with technology, seemed old, decrepit. The floor was uneven, covered in layers of dust, but every so often we would pass by small patches where the dust was strangely disturbed, as though someone or something had recently walked here. Golan led the way, his steps measured and deliberate. We followed close behind, our senses heightened, alert to any anomaly. The lights overhead flickered intermittently, casting harsh shadows that didn't quite align with the geometry of the room. Every corner we turned, Every door we passed seemed to open into a new, endless stretch of hallways and corridors. It was as if the building itself was larger inside than it appeared on the outside. The space felt unnervingly alive, its dimensions stretching and contracting as though governed by forces beyond our understanding. I glanced at my watch. Only a few minutes had passed since we entered, yet the passage of time seemed warped. The facility did not follow the normal rules of reality. We moved through endless corridors, each one seeming to take us deeper into the heart of the structure, but we never seemed to get any closer to our objective. At one point, we encountered a door that should have led to a staircase down, but when we opened it, there was nothing inside, just a sheer drop into darkness. The air grew colder with each step, an unnatural chill creeping through our bones. Suddenly, I heard a sound. A faint rhythmic tapping echoing down the corridor ahead of us. It was soft at first, like a whisper, but it grew louder with each passing second, a heavy thud that seemed to reverberate through the very walls. My heart raced, and I could feel my breath quickening, the pressure in my chest increasing. Everyone else had heard it too, their heads snapping toward the sound. It was unmistakable, a presence, something moving in the depths of the facility. We stopped, our eyes scanning the dim light, trying to pinpoint the source. Golan held up a hand, signaling us to remain silent. The tapping had stopped, replaced by an eerie stillness. We waited, the silence becoming unbearable. Then, just as quickly as it had stopped, the noise returned, a deeper, more deliberate thud, like something large moving through the shadows. I reached for my rifle instinctively, but the sensation of being watched, of being hunted, weighed heavier than any weapon. There was something out there, in the dark, and it knew we were here. We pushed forward, the sound of our boots echoing in the confined space. Golan's face was stoic, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the sharpness of his movements. The flickering lights cast grotesque shadows, distorting the once familiar shape of the hallway into something unrecognizable. The deeper we went, the more the facility felt wrong. The walls seemed to hum, as though they were alive, shifting imperceptibly with each step we took. I could feel it now, a constant pressure in the air like a storm building just beyond our reach. Our mission was still the same: locate the data core, retrieve the information, and leave. But as we pressed on, my mind began to slip. What had once seemed like a straightforward objective now felt like a slow descent into something we were not prepared for. The walls, though lined with advanced technology, felt ancient. The machinery was both sophisticated and outdated, as if this place had been forgotten by time itself. Every screen, every panel, seemed to be in a state of disrepair, yet they still functioned. They flickered to life for brief moments, showing strange, unintelligible symbols that made my skin crawl. Tzvi, our communications specialist, had begun muttering to himself, his hands trembling as he adjusted his equipment. His face had drained of color, and every now and then he would glance over his shoulder as though expecting something to emerge from the shadows. His radio crackled intermittently, the only sound breaking the silence of the halls. At first I thought it was just static, but then I began to hear something within it. A whisper. It was faint, too distorted to make sense of, but the longer I listened, the more I could hear names being called, soft and pleading. We reached a central control room, the doors sliding open with a hiss. Inside, rows of monitors blinked to life as we entered, illuminating the room with an eerie, greenish glow. But it was the center of the room that drew my attention. A large, cylindrical device embedded in the floor, covered in strange symbols. It seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly energy. A low hum filled the room, vibrating through the floor and into my bones. The air felt thicker here, charged with something intangible. It was as if the building itself was alive, feeding off our presence. Golan approached the console, his hand steady as he activated the interface. The screen flickered, showing a series of cryptic images that shifted rapidly, too fast for us to comprehend. Some symbols seemed to glow with a pale light, while others twisted into shapes that were not human, not even recognizable. But there was one constant, the unmistakable presence of something ancient, something watching. The symbols seemed to react to our movements, shifting in response to our presence. As Golan and Tzvi tried to make sense of the data, Eli and Daniela kept their eyes on the door, weapons raised. The tension in the room was palpable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were intruders in a place that should not be disturbed. I glanced at my watch, but the time seemed to flicker, as if it were warping in real time. The numbers danced before my eyes, shifting in ways I couldn't explain. Seconds stretched into minutes, minutes into hours. We were losing track of time, and that was the least of my concerns. It was then that I felt it. A shift in the air, a sudden drop in temperature. My breath misted in front of me, despite the heat of the desert outside. There was no breeze, no ventilation, but I could feel the cold creeping in, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. My heart pounded in my chest, and a feeling of dread gnawed at my insides. Whatever we had woken up in this place, it was beginning to stir. The shadows in the corners of the room began to twitch, lengthening and shortening as though alive. Something was watching us, something we had not yet seen. The room grew colder, the shadows thickening around us, bending in unnatural angles. For a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Something flickered in the corner of my vision, a shadow that didn't belong. But then, it moved again. It was a fleeting movement, quick, too swift to pinpoint. I turned sharply toward the corner, rifle raised, but there was nothing there, just the low, pulsating hum of the facility's machinery and the eerie flicker of the monitors. Tzvi seemed oblivious to my discomfort, his attention fixed on the strange symbols blinking across the screen. But then, his fingers froze over the keyboard. His face went pale, his lips parted as though he were about to speak, but no words came out. His breath quickened, shallow gasps that filled the room. I stepped closer to him, feeling a strange pull in the air. His hands trembled as he backed away from the console, his eyes wide with fear. "Something's wrong," he muttered, voice barely above a whisper. It's not just data. It's alive." His words hung in the air, thick with dread. Before I could respond, the power flickered. The lights dimmed, then brightened again, casting long, distorted shadows against the walls. I felt my skin crawl, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The temperature seemed to drop even further, the cold seeping into my bones, seizing control of my thoughts. Suddenly, the door to the control room slammed shut, a sound like thunder shaking the very foundation of the building. We all jumped, weapons raised instinctively, but the sound didn't stop. It was a constant, rhythmic thudding, as if something was pounding against the door from the other side. The air itself felt tight, as though the room was being compressed. I could feel the pressure in my chest, an invisible force bearing down on us from all directions. We were trapped. Tzvi was the first to move, his eyes locked on the door, his hands moving toward the console in a panic. "It's not just the facility. It's the whole place. The data is changing, rewriting itself." His voice was shaky, desperate, as if he were losing control of his thoughts. The monitors flickered again, each time displaying more cryptic symbols. A low, guttural hum echoed from the walls, reverberating through the ground beneath our feet. It was impossible to ignore. Then, we heard it. A whisper. Soft at first, almost inaudible, but it grew louder with each passing second. It wasn't a voice we could recognize, but it was unmistakably human. Names were called, familiar names, but they were distorted, twisted, warped in ways I couldn't understand. They were not our own, but they were close enough to make my blood run cold. The whispers echoed from all corners of the room, filling every crack and crevice, drowning out all other sounds. I turned to Golan, but his face was ashen, his eyes wide with disbelief. "We need to leave," he said, his voice breaking the silence like a hammer on glass. But before we could move, a heavy thud rang out from the ceiling above, followed by the unmistakable sound of something heavy, something large, moving in the darkness above. I could hear the creaking of the structure, as if the very bones of the facility were stretching, groaning under some immense weight. Golan motioned for us to move quickly, but it was already too late. The lights went out completely, plunging the room into total darkness. The only sound was the incessant, rhythmic thumping of something massive, moving just beyond our reach. I could feel its presence now, pressing in on us from all sides. The walls seemed to pulse, and the air grew thick with an electric charge, like the approach of a storm. We were no longer alone in the room. Whatever had been hiding here for centuries was beginning to reveal itself. The room was pitch black, the silence deafening, save for the heavy, distorted sound of something moving above us. I could feel my breath quicken, the darkness pressing in around me like an inescapable force. We were standing in the heart of something ancient, something that should have been left undisturbed. The walls seemed to close in with every breath, as though the building itself were tightening its grip. Then the lights flickered back to life, but only for a moment. When they returned, it was worse. The shadows seemed to move independently, stretching unnaturally across the walls, their forms taking shape in ways that defied logic. I could see them now, pale and indistinct, flickering and shifting like wisps of smoke caught in a wind that didn't exist. They weren't merely cast by the light. They were alive, breathing, writhing. Some of them were too large to be human, their outlines stretching beyond the confines of the room. Eli cursed under his breath, raising his rifle as if to fire at the shadows, but he hesitated, unsure of what he was seeing. "What the hell is that?" he muttered, his voice trembling. It was then that I noticed it, a set of footprints, deep and imprinted in the dust on the floor. The prints were strange, too large, too perfect, each step leaving behind an impression that seemed to distort in the air, warping as though they were being seen through ripples in water. They led into the darkness, deeper into the facility. Whoever, or whatever, had left them, had walked the halls long before we arrived. "Stay close," Golan ordered, his voice tight and controlled, though the fear was evident in his eyes. We moved as a group, stepping cautiously into the next corridor, the oppressive silence broken only by the distant thuds coming from above. The shadows continued to writhe along the walls, but now there was something else. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, whispering, like wind through dry leaves, but the words were distorted, incomprehensible. It wasn't human, yet it felt like something was calling us, drawing us further in. I glanced at Zvi, who was watching the shadows with wide, haunted eyes. He had stopped speaking altogether, his gaze fixed on the shifting figures. "It's not just data," he said again, this time with a tremor in his voice. "It's alive. It's changing everything. It's not just the building. It's all connected. We're in it now." As we pressed forward, the flickering of the lights grew worse. At first it was a simple stutter, but soon the lights were blinking erratically, casting harsh shadows that split and distorted. I could feel the walls pulsating, vibrating with an energy that was beyond comprehension. The air tasted metallic, thick with something that made it hard to breathe. It was as if we had crossed into a different realm, one where the rules of physics and time no longer applied. We reached a door that had not been there before. It wasn't on the map. It wasn't supposed to exist. Its surface was covered in symbols, runes that seemed to move as we looked at them. The door shimmered, almost as if it were a mirage, flickering in and out of existence. But it was there, undeniably there. Golan stepped forward, his hand hesitating just inches from the door. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. The shadows pressed closer, wrapping themselves around us, blocking our escape. "Open it," Golan ordered. His voice was steady, but I could hear the unease buried beneath the command. I approached the door, my hand trembling as I touched the cold metal. The moment I made contact, the room seemed to tilt, the ground shifting beneath our feet. The light flickered, and for a split second, I saw something in the corner of my eye. A shape, humanoid, but not quite. It moved too fast, too fluid, and before I could blink, it was gone. I stumbled back, my pulse racing, but when I turned to look again, there was nothing there. The door opened with a hiss, and we stepped into the unknown. The room beyond the door was unlike anything we had encountered so far. It was massive, its walls lined with jagged, organic structures that pulsed with an eerie, dim light. The air was thick with an electric charge, as though the atmosphere itself was saturated with some unseen force. The floor was uneven, cracked in places, and the faint sound of something scraping against the walls echoed through the space. But it wasn't the room itself that stopped me. It was the presence. At first I thought I had imagined it, a faint shifting shape in the far corner of the room, just a flicker in my peripheral vision. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, it became undeniable. It was tall, its form skeletal yet unnervingly smooth, like a human figure stretched too thin, too tall. Its body seemed to bend and twist in ways that defied anatomy, its limbs far too long, moving with an unnatural fluidity. Its skin, if it could be called that, was a pale, translucent membrane that seemed to shift and ripple like water. The creature's face was the most horrifying thing of all. It was not entirely human, but there was something in its hollow, lidless eyes that spoke of an ancient intelligence, something ancient, something eternal. Its mouth was a gaping wide hole, filled with rows of teeth that looked too sharp, too many, as though it had never known hunger, only a need to consume. And as I looked at it, I could feel it looking back, its gaze piercing through me like a cold wind. It was standing motionless, but I could feel its presence, an oppressive weight that pressed down on the room, like the crushing force of a storm about to break. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. We were paralyzed, caught in the grip of something far beyond our understanding. And then, with an awful slow motion, it tilted its head, almost as if it were studying us, learning us, savoring the moment before whatever came next. "Fall back," Golan ordered sharply, his voice a sharp command that broke the silence. But even as the words left his mouth, I could hear it, the sound of movement, of feet scraping against the floor behind us. I whipped around, my heart racing, but there was nothing. The door behind us had slammed shut, the sound of it echoing through the facility like a death knell. We were trapped. The creature took a step forward, its movements so fluid that they seemed to defy the laws of nature. With each step, the air seemed to grow thicker, colder. The shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting around the creature, following its every motion as though they were part of it. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as it drew closer, a sickly, sharp smell filling the air, like metal, like decay. Suddenly, Tisvi let out a strangled cry, his body jerking as though he had been struck. He staggered backward, clutching his head, his eyes wide with terror. "It's inside my head. It's talking to me," he gasped, his voice breaking as if he were trying to scream but couldn't. He fell to his knees, his body convulsing in some horrible rhythm. I wanted to rush to him to pull him back, but I was frozen in place, caught in the creature's gaze. The creature extended its arm, long, impossibly long, and with a motion that felt slow but deliberate, it reached toward Zvi. The shadows wrapped around the arm, twisting and stretching as though alive, drawing the figure closer to its prey. The hum in the air intensified, vibrating through my chest, until it felt like my very bones were being shaken apart. It was then that I saw it. A sudden flash of movement in the corner of my eye, a blur of something that should not have been there. Shapes, figures, disembodied faces, all flickering in and out of existence. They were watching, waiting. My stomach churned, and I realized that we were no longer in the facility we had entered. We had crossed into something else, something far darker and far older. The creature's hand hovered just above Tisvi's head, and I felt my breath catch. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, but I could see everything. The air shimmered with unnatural energy, and then, with a horrifyingly smooth motion, the creature's hand descended. The moment the creature's hand touched Tisvi's head, the room seemed to collapse inward. A deafening sound, like 1,000 voices screaming in unison, filled the air, reverberating through the walls, the floor, the very air we breathed. My body felt like it was being stretched, pulled in every direction at once, as if the fabric of reality itself was being torn apart. The lights flickered violently, casting everything in sharp, flickering flashes of light and shadow. Tisvi's body went rigid, his eyes wide and glassy, the pupils swirling in patterns that made no sense. His mouth opened, but the words that came out were not his own. They were distorted, layered, like the voice of something ancient speaking through him. "You are the chosen ones, the fuel, the offering." The words didn't sound human. They sounded like they were being dragged from deep forgotten places, places no mortal mind should tread. We watched in horror as Tzvi's body began to distort. His skin stretched, pulling tight across his bones, his hands twitching as if they were trying to break free of some unseen force. His voice grew louder, louder than was possible, until it sounded like a chorus, an orchestra of voices all speaking at once. "It is time to feed, time to wake," the chorus said, vibrating through every part of me. I could feel the presence of the creature getting closer, but I could no longer see it. My vision blurred and everything around me began to twist. Golan shouted something, perhaps a command, perhaps a warning, but his voice was lost in the static of the overwhelming sound. I could feel the ground shift beneath my feet, and when I looked down, the floor was rippling, like water disturbed by an unseen current. The walls around us groaned, and the facility seemed to flex, expanding and contracting in ways that made no sense. My heartbeat was thundering in my ears, and yet despite the madness unfolding around us, there was a sense of cold clarity, like I was suddenly seeing everything for what it truly was. This place was a living thing, ancient and unfathomable, and it was feeding off us. Daniela screamed, but it wasn't her voice. It was something else, something guttural and wrong, as her form began to bend, twist in ways that defied physics. Her limbs stretched, contorted, her body elongating until she was almost unrecognizable. Her skin paled and peeled, as though it were being shed like an old decaying husk. Her eyes turned black, voids of nothing, and she looked at us, not as Daniela, but as something else entirely, something monstrous, a reflection of something deeper, darker. "Daniela!" Eli shouted, rushing forward, but before he could reach her, his own body buckled. His hands clawed at his face as his fingers elongated, the joints cracking and popping, twisting unnaturally. His mouth opened, but instead of a scream, a sound like machinery grinding together echoed from his throat. His body swelled, growing grotesque, as if some alien force was reshaping him from the inside out. His form no longer resembled a human being. Instead, he was a distorted mass of limbs and grotesque angles, his skin translucent, filled with dark veins that pulsed in time with the throbbing energy of the facility. The shadows around us shifted again, this time coalescing into shapes. Faces, long-forgotten images of beings that should not have existed. They flickered in and out of existence, their mouths agape, whispering secrets that no human was meant to know. The whispers filled my mind, and for a moment I saw them clearly. Ancient beings, their forms shifting like liquid, creatures that had slumbered beneath the earth for eons. They had been waiting for something, waiting for us. My breath caught in my throat as I turned to Golan. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with disbelief, but in them, I saw something else. Fear. This was not a man who feared combat, who feared death. But this was something else. "We need to leave now," he managed to say, but his voice was hollow, as if even his own words were being swallowed by the very air around us. He motioned for us to move, but it was already too late. The walls around us began to twist again, their surfaces undulating like the surface of a dark, unknown sea. The lights above us blinked out entirely, leaving us in complete darkness. The only sound now was the low, humming vibration that filled the room, the air thick with pressure, as though the entire facility was closing in on us. And then, just before my vision faded entirely, I saw the creature again. Its face, its eyes, now fully visible, peering at us from the darkness. The creature moved again, this time not as an apparition, but fully materialized, its towering form now a grotesque reality in front of us. The air hummed with power, a raw, terrifying energy that seemed to distort the very space around it. Its limbs stretched unnaturally long, its jagged teeth glinting in the half-light. And its eyes, those terrible eyes, locked onto us with an intelligence that felt ancient, as though it had been watching us for far longer than we had been alive. I could feel the weight of its gaze pressing down on me, pulling my thoughts into places they should not go. I didn't know who moved first, whether it was Golan or perhaps it was just the collective instinct to survive, but in an instant, we were scrambling, weapons raised, our minds clouded with panic. But nothing felt real anymore. The gunfire that erupted from Eli's rifle echoed like a distant memory, the rounds striking the creature, but disappearing into its form as though they had no substance. There was no blood, no recoil, just the strange, wet sound of metal vanishing into nothing. The creature didn't flinch, it didn't move, it simply watched. Then, the air around us began to ripple again, the temperature plummeting in an instant. I felt as if I was breathing in thick smoke, the metallic taste of it choking me. The ground beneath us cracked, the facility groaning in protest, as if it were about to collapse on itself. But it wasn't the building that was moving. It was the thing inside it, the thing that had been sleeping, waiting for its moment to emerge. The walls around us began to fold inward, like the facility itself was breathing, collapsing around us. I looked over at Zvi, his face twisted in a grotesque mask of horror. His mouth moved, but no words came out. His body was trembling, shaking, as if he were no longer in control. "We need to get out of here," Golan shouted, but it was clear that our efforts to escape were futile. The exits, the doors, none of them were where they were supposed to be. The entire facility seemed to shift, the hallways folding into themselves like a living maze. No matter how much we moved, we were never getting closer to the exit. The walls seemed to close in on us, suffocating us with an invisible pressure. I turned to face the creature once more. It was standing in the center of the room, its body now surrounded by a swirling mass of energy. The shadows clung to it, their forms melding with its body. It wasn't just one creature anymore. It was the embodiment of everything ancient, everything forgotten. It was a reflection of something much older than us, something beyond understanding. And in that moment, I realized that we were nothing more than ants, crawling on the surface of an infinite cosmic force. We were insignificant. As I raised my rifle once more, the creature's form flickered, and for a brief second I saw something else, something that shouldn't have been there. A flash of light, of stars, as if we were looking through a window into another dimension, another reality. The creature's body bent, its limbs contorting in unnatural ways, and the floor beneath it cracked open, revealing an endless void, a swirling mass of dark energy. It was pulling us toward it, slowly, inexorably. The pressure in the room became unbearable, the sound of the hum becoming a deafening roar, like the end of everything. Eli's screams were cut short as the creature's shape lunged forward, engulfing him in darkness. His body was pulled into the abyss, his form distorted and twisted, breaking apart as though he were made of glass. And then, just like that, he was gone. The creature didn't move, didn't react. It simply watched. Golan and Daniela moved toward the edge of the room, their eyes frantic as they searched for an escape. But the room was closing in on them. The door, the only exit, was now miles away, a distant memory, lost in the swirling chaos of the facility. I saw Golan's face, his eyes wide, his mouth moving in an attempt to form words, but nothing made sense anymore. There was no direction, no escape, only the suffocating grip of the thing that had been waiting. I turned toward the center of the room, my rifle raised, but it was already too late. The creature was no longer just in front of us. It was within us, a part of our thoughts, our minds. I could feel it, twisting and turning, uncoiling the fabric of my reality. The walls melted away, the air bending and warping, and then, nothing. The world around us had become a nightmare. The room, the facility, no longer existed in any recognizable form. It was as if the very fabric of reality had unraveled, leaving behind an impossible void. The floor shifted beneath our feet, undulating like the surface of water, and the walls were no longer solid but liquid, bending and flowing like an organic membrane. Time itself seemed to bend, stretching and collapsing in ways I couldn't comprehend. I looked around at the others, Golan, Daniela, Zvi, each of them lost in their own private torment. Daniela's body was still contorted, her limbs twisted in grotesque ways, her eyes hollow, but her movements had slowed, her once defiant will now nothing more than a flickering ember in a dying fire. Zvi, still kneeling on the floor, had become a silent observer, his body locked in place, his expression blank. Whatever had happened to him, it had left him a shell, a vessel, no longer fully human. Golan's voice cut through the madness. "We have to get out of here," he shouted again, but the words were meaningless. There was no exit. There was no escape. His movements were erratic, desperate, as he searched for a way out, his hands touching the warped walls, the flickering shadows that seemed to move in response to his touch. He was no longer the commanding officer we had followed into this place. He was just a man, struggling against forces he could never understand. I tried to take a step forward, but the ground beneath me gave way. I was falling, not through space, but through time. The sensation was worse than anything I had experienced. It was as though I was being pulled apart, my body stretching and warping as I fell, but I couldn't see anything. There was no up, no down, only a suffocating darkness that closed in on me. The last thing I heard was the sound of Golan's voice calling out, distorted, warped by the collapsing space around us. When I came to, I was no longer in the facility. I was lying on the sand, my body bruised, aching, as though I had been dragged through the desert. The air was hot and dry, the harsh sun beating down on me, and yet it felt wrong. The world around me was the same, the endless stretch of desert, the horizon a hazy blur. But there was something off. The shadows seemed to fall in impossible directions, the sky a shade too pale, the air tasting metallic, as though something had seeped into it. The place felt foreign, like a twisted version of the world I had known. I staggered to my feet, my head spinning. There was no sign of the facility, no sign of the creature. My mind was struggling to make sense of what had happened. Had it all been a hallucination? A fever dream brought on by the heat? But no. I could still feel the weight of the horror pressing down on me, lingering like a dark cloud, suffocating everything I touched. I turned around, searching the horizon, hoping to see something, anything, that could explain where I was. But there was nothing. Just the endless desert. Golan appeared beside me, his face a ghostly pale mask of disbelief. He looked around, scanning the empty landscape as if expecting to see something else, something that would make sense of the madness. But he didn't speak. There was nothing to say. He had seen it too, the creature, the collapsing reality, the thing that had pulled us into this hell. Daniela was nowhere to be seen. I called out for her, but the wind swallowed my words, leaving me with nothing but an empty silence in return. My heart sank as I realized what had happened. We had escaped, but we had escaped into nothing. The world around us was wrong, twisted. Time had fractured, and we were no longer part of the reality we had known. Then came the voices. At first it was just a whisper, a faint murmur in the back of my mind. But it grew louder, clearer, and soon I realized it was no longer inside my head. It was coming from the air itself. The wind carried the whispers, the calls, the names. They were not just our names. They were the names of others, of people long forgotten, voices from another time, another place. The voices called to us, beckoning us to return. I turned to Golan. His eyes were wide, unblinking, as though he were hearing it too. His face was drawn with the same terror that was slowly crawling over me, consuming me. He reached out a hand, but I could feel the pull of the voices, the pull of the desert, growing stronger with each passing moment. It was as if the earth itself was alive, calling us back to where we had come from, drawing us into its depths. "We need to go," Golan whispered, his voice shaking. But where? Where could we go? I looked around, but there was nothing. The desert was endless, stretching out in every direction. There was no escape. The voices grew louder, more insistent. I felt the weight of them pressing down on me, pulling me, dragging me toward something I couldn't see, something I didn't want to understand. And then it hit me, the realization that we were no longer in control. We had never been. The desert, the facility, the creature. It had all been a part of something far greater, far older. We were merely pawns in a game that had been played long before us. We had stepped into its web, and now it was closing in. I could hear the sound of footsteps behind me, heavy, unnatural, too heavy for a human, but there was nothing to do now. The desert had claimed us. We were part of it now, trapped in its endless, suffocating void. The silence of the desert stretched around us like a shroud, wrapping tightly around every breath, every movement. Golan and I stood in the midst of that endless emptiness, our minds reeling, bodies heavy with exhaustion. But we didn't speak. There were no words left. What had we even escaped? The creature, the facility, the impossible breach in time. Nothing made sense anymore. I could still hear the whispers in the back of my mind, faint echoes of names I didn't recognize, memories that didn't belong to me. But they were growing louder, stronger, as if the desert was speaking to us through its endless silence. Golan seemed unchanged in some ways, his eyes still wide, haunted, his face drawn with an unspoken horror. But something was different. His movements were slower, his gaze distant. It was as though he was no longer fully present, as if a part of him had stayed behind, trapped in the broken reality we had left. His skin, once tanned by years of fieldwork, had taken on a grayish pallor, as if it were fading, becoming something that belonged to the earth itself. The unnatural chill that had settled into his bones during our time in the facility had never left him. Tazvi was gone. There was no sign of him, no trace in the sand. But I didn't need to see him to know that he had been consumed by whatever force had ripped through that place. I could feel his absence as keenly as if it had been carved into the very air we breathed. The desert had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many before him, leaving only an empty space where his presence once was. I turned my attention to Daniela, but there was still no sign of her. Had she too been lost in the strange, shifting space of the facility? I couldn't shake the feeling that she had never really left it, that whatever had twisted her body and mind had made sure she was still a part of it. Whatever she had become in that moment, it had followed her, followed us all. I felt her absence more sharply than I cared to admit, the weight of her fate hanging over me like an anchor. Golan took a step forward, his movements slow and deliberate, and I followed, unsure of what we were looking for. We weren't heading anywhere in particular. We had no direction, no goal, only the endless expanse of desert before us, offering nothing but its stark, indifferent silence. The shadows around us seemed to shift, subtle but unmistakable. The air felt heavier now, pressing down on us, thick with the weight of something unseen. I tried to steady my breathing, but every inhale tasted wrong, metallic, like the scent of rust. The whispers were louder now, louder than before, their words crawling under my skin, twisting my thoughts. And then, as we walked, I saw something strange in the distance. A glint of light, faint and shimmering, just at the edge of the horizon. My heart skipped a beat. At first, I thought it was a mirage, something my mind had created in the heat, in the insanity of this place. But as we drew closer, the glint grew more pronounced, more real. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was something solid, something that didn't belong in this world. We moved toward it, step by slow step, until the shape came into focus. It was a structure, a building of some kind, half buried in the sand, its surface covered with strange, alien symbols. The architecture was unlike anything I had ever seen, shifting, fluid, as if it were both part of the earth and separate from it. It looked like the remnants of the facility we had just left, but it was older, much older. Its presence seemed to ripple through the air, distorting everything around it. I felt my heart race. We weren't free, not really. The desert had never let us go. It had simply given us another place to fall into its grasp. I turned to Golan, but his face was blank, as if he had already accepted what was happening. He didn't speak, but I could see it in his eyes, the same realization that had settled in my chest. We were no longer ourselves. We had become something else, something altered by the forces we had encountered, something that could never return to the world we once knew. I reached out to touch the structure, my fingers brushing against the strange, cold surface. The moment I made contact, the air seemed to thicken, and the world around me shimmered. Time seemed to collapse, and the whispers swirled into a cacophony, filling my mind, my soul. The desert no longer felt like a place I could escape from. It had become a part of me, and I had become a part of it. I stepped back, my chest tight, breath shallow. Golan was still standing there, staring at the structure as if it were the answer to everything. But there was no answer here. There was no way back. We had crossed a threshold, and there was no returning to the lives we once had. The desert had changed us, and now we were its guardians, or its prisoners. When the extraction came, it was too smooth, too easy. The black helicopters touched down without incident, their engines humming quietly against the stillness of the desert. The soldiers who met us were calm, efficient, too calm, too efficient. They moved with practiced precision, their faces impassive as they loaded us onto the choppers, their eyes scanning the horizon with an unsettling detachment. It was as if they had known exactly what had happened, as if they had expected us to return, broken and hollow but still alive. I remember looking out over the desert one last time as the chopper ascended, the ground receding beneath us. The heat, the suffocating weight of the silence. It felt like a part of me was still there, still trapped in that twisted place. The whispers, the voices, had not stopped. They had followed us, threading through the air, haunting the space between my thoughts. It was as though the desert had never truly let us go. Even now, I could hear it calling, distant but persistent. When we landed, there were no questions. No one asked about the mission. No one asked what had happened inside the facility. The officers who greeted us were blank, unreadable, their eyes devoid of any real concern. We were ushered into a sterile room, white walls, cold, efficient. The air smelled like disinfectant, like antiseptic, a stark contrast to the choking metallic stench of the desert. A table sat in the center of the room, surrounded by chairs that felt too clean, too clinical. It felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. We sat down, Golan, Daniela, and I, the survivors, our bodies aching, minds fraying at the edges. The others, Tzvi and Eli, hadn't made it. We all knew it without speaking. The ones who hadn't returned were lost, consumed by something far worse than death. Their absence was felt as deeply as if they had been erased from time itself. They had become a part of the desert, a part of whatever dark force had claimed the facility. A man in a suit, someone I didn't recognize, someone too polished to belong in a place like this, entered the room. He sat across from us, his face expressionless. His eyes didn't meet mine, nor did they meet Golan's or Daniela's. They flicked to the papers in front of him, his hands folding them with mechanical precision. "Operation Anubis is closed," he said simply, his voice devoid of emotion. "Your reports have been received and are being processed. All non-essential information will be erased. You are to return to standard duties immediately." His words hung in the air, cold and final. I tried to speak, to explain what had happened, to tell them what we had seen, but the words twisted in my mouth. The truth, our truth, was already beginning to slip away. Each time I tried to articulate it, it turned to static, to lies, to something unrecognizable. It felt like my own thoughts were betraying me, fragmenting, collapsing under the weight of what I had seen. "Your memories have been adjusted," the man continued, his eyes finally meeting mine, his gaze colder than the sterile room. "The facility did not exist. The mission did not happen. The truth you think you know is not the truth. Everything will be archived in non-existent records. You will not speak of this again." His voice was flat, but there was an unmistakable chill in it, a warning. I could feel it in my bones. The truth was being buried, erased, as though it had never happened. Golan didn't react. Daniela didn't either. They were both staring ahead, their faces blank, their minds already lost to whatever had been done to them. I could see it now, the way their memories were being rewritten, the way they were slowly becoming someone else. It was happening to me too, but I resisted. I fought to hold on to something, anything. But it was slipping away, like sand through my fingers. "Return to your designated roles," the man said, standing up. "Your cooperation is expected. There will be no further discussions." His eyes lingered on me for a moment, then moved on, dismissing us like a report to be filed away. We were escorted out, our feet dragging, our minds numb, as though we were walking through a dream we couldn't wake from. The sounds of the base, so sterile, so controlled, seemed to press against my skull, suffocating me. There was nothing here for us anymore. No explanation, no comfort. Only the overwhelming sense that we were being erased, forgotten, pushed into the dark corners of the world where nothing would ever reach us. As I walked through the halls, I saw the faces of the other agents. They greeted us, nodded politely, but their eyes were empty. They didn't know us. They didn't know what we had become, what we had witnessed. We were already ghosts, shadows of ourselves, the memories of the desert and the facility fading like smoke. I tried to reach out, to hold on to the remnants of who I had been. I wanted to speak the truth, to tell the world, but every time I opened my mouth, the words twisted, became lies. The memory of that place, of the entity, of the shadows, was already slipping away, sinking into a place I couldn't reach. They had erased us just as they had erased the truth. It would never be spoken of again. It was classified. No, it was non-existent. But I knew. We all knew. I sit here now, in my apartment. No, not an apartment, but a sterile room, a place I have been reassigned to. The walls are white, the furniture cold and uninviting. A desk, a chair, a bed, all arranged with perfect symmetry, as though designed to erase any semblance of individuality. But I cannot escape the feeling that something is watching me, that I am not alone, even though I am. The whispers have not stopped. They never will. Every corner of my mind echoes with their voices, faint but insistent, like a wind that never dies. At times they sound like the calls of the men and women we lost, their names now distant, echoes in the dark. At other times it is the entity, that ancient thing we awoke, its presence lingering like a shadow that will never leave. I sit at my desk, writing this last testimony, hoping that somehow, somewhere someone will understand. But even as I write, the words twist and warp in front of me. The sentences fade, rearrange themselves, becoming something I never intended. It is as though the very act of speaking the truth, of writing it down, brings its unraveling, forcing it into a new shape, a lie. The lights above flicker once again. I glance up, watching the bulb blink and hum, the shadows on the walls stretching in impossible directions. The air feels thicker now, heavy, as if the very space around me is bending, distorting. There is no breeze, no wind, yet the curtains flutter, ever so slightly, as if something unseen is brushing against them. I can feel it, the pressure, the suffocating weight of something behind me, watching from the hallway. The footsteps, too heavy for any human, echo in the distance. I stand and move toward the door, my body stiff, heart pounding, but when I open it, there is nothing. Just the quiet hum of the building, the empty hallway stretching out before me, unchanged. As I turn to close the door, my eyes are drawn to the clock on the wall. The time is wrong, hours off, but I cannot quite understand how. The numbers shift and distort, and when I glance again, the hands seem to be moving backward, twisting and bending as if caught in some kind of reverse cycle. I sit back down, the pen in my hand trembling. The whispers have grown louder now. The shadows on the walls are moving independently, stretching, growing, forming new shapes, things I cannot quite understand. My own reflection in the window is no longer mine. It grins back at me, a twisted version of myself, its eyes hollow and dark, as though it knows something I do not. The clock ticks again, and this time, I hear a sound from the hallway, heavy, purposeful, closer now. I turn, half expecting to see something standing there, but when I look, the hallway is empty, save for the shadows that seem to pulse with life. The footsteps are gone, but the air is thick with an unnatural silence. The creature. It is still there. I know it is. The desert never lets go. It waits. It is patient, watching from the shadows, waiting for us to finish destroying ourselves. We cannot escape. We never could. The entity does not need to destroy us. It doesn't need to lift a finger. It simply watches and waits. We will finish what it began.